Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 full party building guide for Honor Mode. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering the best no-rest party in Baldur's Gate 3. So this party operates entirely without ever needing to rest, either short or long, with no important cooldowns, resources, or abilities tied to resting. So you simply never have to think about what to do next, because the answer can always be keep going, and going, and going. Whether you want to literally never rest for a challenge run, or just minimize resting to preserve day-long buffs or avoid having to think about resource management, this party gives you all the tools that you need to win fights every single fight forever. Each build is very powerful in its own right, and when combined, they form an even more powerful and synergistic whole, with everything that you need to dominate Honor Mode without ever stopping. Just like all of my other Honor Mode party guides, this party is designed to work together extremely naturally. We cover all of the skills that you need and utilities that you need outside of combat across the builds. There are no overlapping item requirements. In fact, for this particular party, there are very few specific item requirements at all. And we don't need any specific story choices. You can use them with any companions. So no matter how you want to play your run, you can use this party to do it. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to 8 Databits for the $2 donation, Ryantology for the $20, Acheon for the $10, Wanda Husbando for the £5, and EK and Courtney for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate the support. It really means a lot to me. Alright, let's just keep on going. So let's take a second to talk about why you might want to play a no-resting party. So obviously for an experienced player, that can be an interesting challenge run, trying to complete the game with no rests or as few rests as possible. But for a newer player, this party is also, I think, pretty attractive and very powerful, because by virtue of building without cooldowns or long rest resources that you need to manage, it takes a lot of the burden away from the player. These builds are powerful and extremely consistent, and you don't have to make a lot of complicated decisions in order to play them. They will always just work. Rather than having to choose between 200 different spells, you just get builds that are always going to be powerful. So if you're a little newer to the game and intend to play through the game while still resting and stuff normally, this party can still be an excellent choice because it just gives you a lot less complexity that you have to stay on top of, while still being incredibly powerful in every combat. Let's start with our first build, which specializes in overwhelming upfront damage. With this character in the party, the most dangerous enemy in every encounter will start the fight dead, which will make the subsequent fight significantly easier. As always, I'm going to be going over these builds in the video, of course, but I will also link in the description to the full build guide for each of these characters, so if you want more detail on any of these builds, definitely go check those out. This character is going to be a classic Gloomstalker, a Gloomstalker Ranger Assassin Rogue multiclass who can just delete enemies at the beginning of every fight. Normally you would start with Rogue here in order to get extra skills, but we're going to cover those with a different character in this party, so this character is going to start with Ranger to maximize our combat power as soon as possible. So level 1, we're taking Ranger. For our favored enemy pick, we're going to take Ranger Knight. Ranger Knight is useful in some cases where there's a couple pieces of heavy armor that we might be interested in throughout the game. Mostly the reason that we're taking this, though, is because none of these others particularly do anything for us. For Natural Explorer, we're going to take Wasteland Wanderer Fire. Fire damage is the most common damage type in the game, so having resistance to it makes this character significantly most common elemental damage type in the game, obviously. So having resistance to it makes this character significantly harder to kill. For our ability score selection, this character only cares about having dexterity as well as hit points and some saving throws, so we get away with the greediest possible attribute split in the game. We're going to start with 17 dexterity, 16 in constitution, which will increase our hit points dramatically, and then 15 wisdom. Obviously, we're going to even out these odd numbers later on. If you want to, you can start with 12 strength for a little extra jump distance and carry weight in the early game, and start like so, and then switch to this attribute setup later on with a respec. But respecking is also resting, so I'm going to present these builds to avoid respecking as well. This character just keys everything off of dexterity, so we just want that to be as high as possible. For our skill selection here, there aren't any particular skills that we desperately need other than stealth. This character, of course, is going to try to kill enemies from stealth frequently, so you definitely need to pick stealth, and we will later get stealth expertise when we take levels in rogue. This character also can provide perception. As a ranger, we get access to it. We've got good wisdom, which we will increase as we continue to go through the game, so this can be our trap-finding character as well. And then for your last skill selection here, it doesn't really matter what you pick, so you can pick whatever you want for flavor, or take athletics or acrobatics to make you a little harder to shove around if enemies try to push you. That's it for level 1, let's keep going. At level 2, we're continuing to take levels in Ranger, and as an Archer, we're going to, of course, take the Archery Fighting Style. This gives us a +2 bonus to hit, which will offset our Sharpshooter penalty, and also just make us significantly more dangerous, especially in the early game. Archery Fighting Style is incredibly powerful, so a real draw to having an Archer in your party. For our spell selection here, we're going to take 2 ritual spells, which don't require spell slots to cast if used outside of combat. With Enhanced Sleep and Longstrider, we get these spells. Enhanced Sleep you can cast before combat starts on your party to give them extra mobility. Longstrider you can cast on everyone at the beginning of the day. Since you're not resting, that day will last forever, so you'll always have the Longstrider buff. But this is basically a way to get huge amounts of value from your Ranger spell casting, even though you can never refresh the spell slots, because you're not spending them in the first place. Level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and the subclass that we're going to pick is, of course, Gloomstalker. Gloomstalker Ranger gets a +3 bonus to initiative, which is awesome. This is an incredibly powerful ability, and it means that we can safely skip alert on this character with the +3, with high dexterity, of course, from being an archer, and from initiative bonuses from our gear. That will give you plenty to win initiative every time in honor mode. And then you also get an additional attack on the first turn of every combat. The tooltip doesn't say it's an extra attack, but it's a whole extra free attack, and extra movement speed. This is part of how we're going to just delete enemies right away. We can also hide as a bonus action, so we can do that and then immediately disappear again, make sure that we're making all of our attacks with advantage. For a spell selection here, there are no more ritual spells that we're super interested in. You can take something like Speak with Animals if you want to, or you can pick Hunter's Mark and just try to maintain concentration on it as long as possible. If you are literally never long resting, this will eventually go away. If you are long resting only occasionally, then the Hunter's Mark you can just use, and because you can concentrate on it as long as you want, until you eventually lose concentration on the spell from taking damage, it will last for a very, very long time, so you can still get good value out of Hunter's Mark, even if you're resting very infrequently. Character level 4, we're going to take our first feat, and of course as an archer, the feat is going to be Sharpshooter. Yes, this does come with a to-hit penalty, but remember, almost all of our attacks are going to be made with advantage, because we can hide as a bonus action, so our first attack is always going to be from stealth. And we have the +2 bonus from the archery fighting style to offset that. You can use high ground and stuff like that to gain the extra hit bonus. And the +10 damage is an incredibly large boost to our damage, especially because we're getting that 2 times over thanks to playing a Gloomstalker Ranger. So Sharpshooter is a massive DPS increase. Level 5, we're taking our 5th level of Gloomstalker Ranger, and that gets us extra attack. Obviously, this doubles our damage output, or increases it by 50% in the first round of combat, when we already had 2 attacks, which is an incredibly powerful addition to our build, and will let us just delete enemies early on. This character is, at this point, extremely consistent. We just do solid, constant, excellent damage, but we're also going to add even more burst damage as we continue to level up. For our spell selection at this level, we get yet more value from picking ritual spells, because we can take Silence. It's not mentioned anywhere in the tooltip, but Silence is a ritual spell, so if you cast it before combat starts, it doesn't cost you a spell slot as long as you use it outside of combat. This can fully shut down enemy spellcasters, especially if you have a way to keep them in place, which later on this character and several of our other characters will. So Silence can be an incredibly powerful tool against enemy spellcasters. It's also really good in honor mode because there's a lot of honor mode bosses that have legendary actions that require them to make some sort of noise, which silence prevents. So even though we're not picking spells that you need to cast in every fight and then rest to refresh, you still get a lot of value out of this ranger's spellcasting. At character level 6, we've gotten most of what we need from Gloomstalker Ranger now that we have extra attack at this point, so we're going to multi-class, and we're going to take our level of Rogue. This gets us sneak attack, which lets us do an extra d6 of damage once per turn, which doesn't sound like a lot at this point in the game, but every little bit counts. The whole point of this character is to 100 to 0 important targets before fights even begin. So even that little bit of extra damage can make the difference between leaving an enemy alive and killing them outright. It'll also later be doubled when we get the automatic critical hits from our Assassin Rogue levels. We also get expertise in 2 skills and an additional skill selection here. Now obviously one of the skills we're going to do is we're going to put expertise in stealth. The other one doesn't matter as much. You could learn Sleight of Hand and then put expertise in it. We'll already have another character with Sleight of Hand expertise, but having a backup lockpicker and disarming character is always useful. You could put expertise in another skill entirely if there's something else that you want. Expertise in perception also makes this character really good at finding traps and hidden things, so that's another option as well. This one is a little more open to how you want to play the character. Character level 7, we get our second level of Rogue, and that gets us Cunning Action Dash and Disengage. We already effectively have Cunning Action Hide from our Gloomstalker level, but being able to dash as a bonus action gives us a ton of mobility. It means that this character is extremely safe to play. Combined with our high constitution and damage resistances that we're going to keep getting as well, it's very hard, and good armor class, it's very hard to take this character down, and being so mobile, we can get out of fights that are going badly if such a thing ever happens to you. At level 8, we're going to take our third level of Rogue, and we get to choose our Rogue subclass. Of course, the subclass that we're going to pick is Assassin Rogue, which gives us advantage on attack rolls against enemies that haven't taken a turn yet, which means basically advantage on all of our attacks because most enemies that you're facing with this party simply won't get a turn at all. You're going to win initiative and kill them before they ever act. We also get any successful attack against a surprised creature is a critical hit. So on the first round of combat, you're going to be trying to start most of your combats from stealth in order to get these guaranteed crits, and this character will simply just delete enemies. We have 3 attacks in the opening round of combat, because we get an extra one from Gloomstalker Rogue. 3 automatic critical hits with a very high damage character like this one is enough to just delete most enemies and remove all of their hit points. Then we also, when combat actually starts, get to go again, so you can use your attack from stealth to hit an enemy, roll into combat, and then go again with automatic critical hits. So you're just going to obliterate enemies because we effectively get multiple turns at the start of combat if you use this character's abilities to enter combat. Most characters will have used their action when they attack in order to roll into the initiative order. This character gets that back and can just do the whole thing over again, doubling your damage output in the opening turn. At this point, for a normal Gloomstalker assassin build, we would start taking levels in Battlemaster Fighter because you would want the ability for Action Surge and the Battlemaster maneuvers to increase your damage even further. Those require you to rest, though, so for this version of the character, we're just going to keep leveling in Rogue and Ranger in order to get multiple feats and to level up as smoothly as possible. So we're going to take our 4th level of Rogue here, and we'll get an ability improvement. We'll take a point in Dexterity and a point in Wisdom to even out these odd numbers, and now we're hitting more accurately and doing even more damage. Then it's back to Ranger, because again, we want to get another feat very quickly. So we get another favored enemy pick. Of course, here we're going to take Mage Breaker, so we can get True Strike and annoy people in the YouTube comments. And we also get to have Wasteland Wanderer with resistance to cold damage. Cold is the second most common damage type for elemental damage after fire, though poison is also useful depending on what encounter specifically you're coming up to next, but cold is going to generally be more useful in Act 3, so I prefer getting these two. Ranger level 7, as a Gloomstalker Ranger, we also gain proficiency in Wisdom and Intelligence saves, which makes this character extremely resilient. We're already really hard to kill with physical damage, good AC, lots of hit points, resistances to various elemental damage types. This makes us incredibly hard to control with damaging effects, so it makes this character very, very safe. We also get another spell. What spell you pick here mostly doesn't matter. There's just not any that you're going to be using significantly, though you can concentrate on Pass Without Trace until long rest. It will, as long as you maintain concentration, give you a huge stealth bonus. Finally, at Ranger level 8, we get Land Stride for difficult terrain, which is pretty useful for maneuvering around, and we get another feat. Here we're just going to take an ability improvement and max out our dexterity to max out our accuracy and damage with our bow shots, and that's the first character. Of course, let's talk about items next. For this character's items, we really only need a few things. We need a good bow, we need to maximize our damage with that bow, and we need to not die. So for our weapon, we're going to be using the Titan String Bow alongside an Elixir of Hill Giant Strength. The Titan String Bow adds your strength modifier to your damage, so the Elixir lets you increase your strength and get +5 damage on all your shots. Since we're not going to be resting, the Elixir will last forever, making it basically a permanent buff, so you don't even need to stockpile Elixirs with this build. If you really hate using Elixirs at all, you can use the Bow of the Banshee early. This gives you some extra crowd control in the early game, and also is going to deal more damage because we have other characters that are providing fear as well, so that's some nice synergy also. And then in the late game you can swap to Gaunter Mail. This setup will do a little bit less damage than the Titan String Bow setup, but is another great option. We also, of course, want to increase our damage when we fire these bows, so we're looking for items like the Gloves of Archery that make you do extra damage. Later on, we'll want to swap to something like the Flawed Helldust Gloves that do extra damage dice, because those will be multiplied by our automatic critical hits, so glove slot should be increasing your damage. For your armor, in the early game, you're going to be using most likely the Graceful Cloth. The extra dexterity is very important for this character. You want to make sure you're hitting with your attacks and, again, doing as much damage as possible. So the Graceful Cloth, just with the extra dex, makes you extremely effective at that. You will have relatively low AC early game, but this is an archer who's playing mostly from stealth, so that's not a big deal. In the late game, you can swap to a more defensive setup, like the Armor of Agility, which gives you great saving throws and excellent armor class across the board. One of the uncapped medium armors, like the Yuan-Ti Scale Mail, can also be a good option, but the Armor of Agility is going to be the best endgame setup. For your helmet, the Marksmanship Hat in the early game, again, bonuses to your attack rolls, and then in the late game, also bonuses to your attack rolls with the Mask of Soul Perception, which gives you extra attacks and initiative, as well as perception checks, which this character is doing, so this bonus, which usually is just flavor text, is actually relevant for this character. Another important setup for this character is, in the late game especially, you can use the Snowburst Ring, which allows you to create an ice surface every time you do cold damage, alongside the Drakethroat Glaive. Use the Drakethroat Glaive to cast Draconic Elemental Weapon on whatever weapon you're using. Make sure you get this on the right weapon, because this is a long rest refreshed ability, but you can cast it on whatever bow you're using to add cold damage to that. And then every time you fire an arrow, it creates an ice surface. Enemies are going to be falling prone very frequently, so combined with the fear effects from other characters, this does a tremendous amount of crowd control just passively every time you shoot your arrows, so it makes this party extremely dangerous. One of the downsides, of course, of playing a no-rest party is you don't get control spells, but a lot of the builds replicate that effect. We're also going to add in the Strange Conduit Ring. We want damage and bonus damage on our attacks, and specifically, we want bonus damage that comes in the form of extra dice. So the Strange Conduit Ring will add an extra damage die while we're concentrating on a spell. That's very powerful for this character because damage dice are multiplied when you crit, and we get automatic crits. We're usually going to be concentrating on a spell like Hunter's Mark, because even though you will eventually lose concentration on it, for most parties, if you're resting at all, you'll get it back, and if you're not resting at all, you can keep concentration on it for a long time. But also, this character is one of the better characters if you don't want to micromanage trying to stay concentrating on Hunter's Mark, this is probably the best character to carry the Silver Pendant, which gives you guidance. This character, of course, is not the one actually making lockpicking checks and not the one actually performing dialogue checks, so it's the best one to cast guidance. And having a concentration cantrip means that you can set up the Strange Conduit Ring, so you can do extra damage by casting guidance on a character, concentrating on it for a combat, because it's a cantrip, so you can just keep concentrating, and then use the Strange Conduit Ring for extra damage. We also get a shield on this character, and you're going to want to use the Adamantine Shield. This character is incredibly resilient to incoming damage, so having immunity to critical hits is really good for us, because it prevents damage spikes from happening, so the only thing that we're really worried about, sudden bursts of incoming damage, is prevented by the Adamantine Shield. Finally, although another character will likely be using this in the early game, the Knife of the Undermountain King just gives us extra crit chance, so this character can make use of that as well, in order to deal a little bit more damage passively with your melee weapon slot. Alright, that's build number 1, let's move on to build number 2. For our second character, I've already mentioned that one of the challenges for a no-resting run can be that you lack control effects. Without easy access to spells, a lot of the traditional ways that you would control dangerous enemies aren't available or are harder to use for this party. However, we can build characters that passively and permanently crowd control enemies. So we're looking for characters that every single turn can apply extremely heavy debuffs or brutal crowd control effects to enemies without spending anything to do so. Enter the great old one, Warlock. So as a Warlock, of course, we get Eldritch Blast, and as a great old one Warlock, when we hit an enemy with a critical hit, that creature and nearby creatures have to make a wisdom save or become frightened. Frightened is a pretty brutal debuff because it stops enemies from moving, they get disadvantage on their attack rolls, which means that you're just going to defeat melee enemies, anything that's not immune to fear, as long as you can consistently generate critical hits and make enough attacks with Eldritch Blast. So we're going to build this character to do that and to apply even more debuffs every single turn so that we can effectively destroy everything that enemies are trying to do. For our cantrips, of course, we're going to take Eldritch Blast as this character's main damage dealing and crowd control tool, and then we're also going to take Friends. As a charisma-based character, this is going to be our party face, so of course we want Friends to make us better at doing that. We already know our subclass, and so for our spell selection here, it mostly doesn't matter what you pick with your Warlock spells. We don't get access to any ritual spells, so what we pick here is going to be somewhat limited in utility unless you're resting more frequently with this party. So I'm just going to pick spells as though we are resting a little more often, so that if you're using this party and resting normally, you're going to pick the spells that you would pick in that case. So we'll take Dissonant Whispers and Hex in order to increase our damage output. For our ability score selection here, we're going with a classic Warlock ability split of 16 in Dexterity, 14 in Constitution, 16 in Charisma, and 12 in Wisdom in order to maximize our stats as much as possible. For our skill selection, ideally with this character, you have a background or a character that has Persuasion. If you're using Will for this, and it's a Warlock build, so you may well be, then he naturally comes with Persuasion. But it's not required. You'll be able to pick it up from class levels later on, even though Warlocks can't normally start with it, but you can also grab it from a background. Otherwise, we're just going to put our skill points into as many dialogue skills as possible, so we can handle being the party face. At character level 2, we're going to take our second level of Warlock, because then we get Eldritch Invocations here. For our spell selection, if you are resting more frequently, Armor of Agathis is the most useful of these remaining spells. And then for our Eldritch Invocation, of course, we're going to take Agonizing Blast to maximize the damage of our Eldritch Blast. And unlike a normal Warlock, because we will not be able to usually use darkness effectively because we can't cast it, so you're relying on arrows and scrolls if you want to use darkness, we're going to take Repelling Blast. Repelling Blast gives us even more crowd control options where we can push enemies around, so starting with these two is incredibly powerful and gives you a lot of optionality for how you're going to move enemies around the battlefield. At character level 3, this build differs a little bit from how you would normally build this character. So, of course, normally with a Warlock, you want to level your spellcasting as much as possible, but for a party that's not intending to rest frequently, that's much lower of a priority, since Warlock spellcasting requires you to rest in order to use it. So, we're immediately going to multi-class out of Warlock, and we're going to take a level of Rogue. This is going to let us get more critical hits, which means that our Eldritch Blasts are going to crowd control enemies with the Frightened condition much more reliably. So we're going to take a level of Rogue, we get our abilities here, and we get to add Persuasion if we didn't have it already, and gain Expertise in Persuasion, as well as Expertise in whatever other dialogue skill that we want. So this character can now have, say, Persuasion and Intimidation expertise, and be truly excellent at passing dialogue skills for your party. We're also going to add proficiency in Insight. This is useful to have as a party face, so this character can now pass most of the dialogue checks that you want to roll. Another good option for this character, by the way, is if you play a Githyanki, you can set your Astral Knowledge to Intelligence and be better at Intelligence checks as well. But the most important thing is that now we have expertise in all of our important dialogue skills. Level 4, we're going to take a second level of Rogue, which again gets us bonus action hides and dashes, which for a ranged spellcaster are incredibly strong, and this whole party can operate from stealth very easily, since we have lots of characters who are excellent at making stealth checks. Now, this character, you can also take stealth expertise. You're probably not going to be rolling stealth that frequently on this character, but it is an option as well. Then at level 5, this character is also going to take Assassin Rogue, but for a very different reason than the Gloomstalker Ranger. We still, of course, get our automatic critical hits against surprised enemies, and we're going to start most of our fights from surprise. But instead of being worried about the damage, although the damage is also really good on this character, the reason we're doing this is because we're a great old one Warlock. Every time we get a critical hit, which we'll now get automatically, we frighten the enemy and everything near them. So this character is going to be automatically, passively crowd controlling entire encounters just by firing its Eldritch Blasts, which is something that you want to do anyways. At character level 6, we're going to take our 4th level of Rogue, and this is just so that we can get a feat as quickly as possible. Going up to level 6 without a feat has been somewhat difficult, so we're going to grab that now. The feat we're going to take is Alert. This character doesn't get natural bonuses to its initiative, and you want to always go before enemies so that you get your automatic crits from Assassin, so we want to make absolutely certain that we pick that up right away. One of the things I really love about this no resting restriction is that it actually makes builds like this more creative. Normally we would be forced to level with Warlock, at least up to level 5 and get 3rd level Warlock spells, but when you don't prioritize those, you can do more interesting leveling orders like with this build. At level 7, we're going back into Warlock and taking our 3rd level of Warlock, and we get a Pact Boon, which lets us add a new dimension to the character. This character can benefit from taking Pact of the Blade because we can also, as our spell, take Shadow Blade. And this is going to give us a pretty powerful tool for attacking in melee. So while we will still prefer to sit at range, use Eldritch Blast to crowd control enemies, when you want this character to step up and do more damage, having a Shadow Blade with Pact of the Blade can be extremely powerful for increasing our damage output. And since Shadow Blade lasts until long rest, you don't have to worry about the spell slot expenditure. You only ever need to cast it once. At level 8, we're going to take Warlock level 4, getting another feat. And now that we can attack in melee, we can take Booming Blade, which of course increases our melee damage even further when we want to do that. We're also going to get another spell here. It mostly doesn't matter what you pick again. For a character that is not resting, none of these are going to be particularly powerful, but you could take Hold Person, for example, if you are resting a little more frequently. That is going to be that's going to give you even more guaranteed critical hits, which is pretty strong. Remember that with Assassin Rogue and the Shadow Blade and Booming Blade, you get guaranteed crits with those melee attacks as well, so you can also just get enemies dead in addition to hitting them with a fear effect. We also get a feat here, so we're going to take an ASI and boost our charisma. Of course, this character wants to increase its charisma as much as possible. It's also worth mentioning for this character that this is the character that would use Ethel's hair. You would take 17 starting charisma and 10 starting wisdom, and so this character can benefit from that to squeeze out extra charisma as well. At level 9, we're going to take our 5th level of Warlock, because that gets us Deepened Pact, so now we get an extra attack, and that makes us a pretty dangerous melee threat. With our guaranteed criticals when starting combats, this character can output an absurd amount of damage at the beginning of fights, alongside all the crowd control that we're getting as well. We also get a spell here. What spell we pick here, again, mostly doesn't matter, although even if you're never resting, having one emergency counter spell in your back pocket can sometimes still be useful. So that's what I would select. Or you can take something like Hunger of Hadar, or more traditional Warlock spells if you're planning to rest more frequently. For our Eldritch Invocations, we actually have a bunch of choices here. This character, again, is not going to use Devil's Sight super effectively because we're not casting darkness. Although, of course, you can still take Devil's Sight and use scrolls and arrows in order to have this character use darkness. Still very powerful. But we actually, unlike most other Warlocks, get to choose other Eldritch Invocations and have them be good. Fiendish Vigor, for example, is just 7 extra hit points for this character. Mask of Many Faces makes us better at being the party face, because we can disguise ourselves. And even One with Shadows is actually pretty nice for this character. Becoming invisible, as long as we stand still, is pretty good for surprising enemies. So any of these are cool options that you don't normally see on Warlock builds. So I really like the fact that we can take those. You can also take Beast Speech if you want speak with animals, though you can, of course, just get that from a potion. I'm going to take One with Shadows, because you almost never see this, and it's just neat that this character can actually make such good use of it. At level 10 for this character, we actually have a fairly interesting choice. If we're boosting our charisma using the mirror, or Ethel's hair, or other sources of increases to our charisma, which is the most important thing for this character, then we can take 3 levels of Champion Fighter to get increased critical hits, so that in subsequent turns, or in fights where it's not practical to surprise enemies, you can still get pretty frequent critical hits and hit them with fear. For this version of the build, though, we're just going to take another level of Warlock. That gets us Entropic Ward, which can help defend you. Imposing disadvantage on an attack against you can be a pretty useful reaction to keep yourself alive in melee, and the extra advantage on attacks against enemies can be useful as well. So it gives this character, which is otherwise somewhat squishy, a little bit of resilience. For our spell selection here, we're just going to take normally powerful Warlock spells, and then go to level 7, where again we get higher level spells. Again, these mostly don't matter. You could take something like Dimension Door, which is the most likely to be a once per game emergency panic button that you might need. And then you get an Eldritch Invocation. Normally we would be taking these types of spells that give you extra these types of things like Dreadful Word, but for this character we want to take the passive or permanent benefits, things like Fiendish Vigor, Devil's Sight, or Mask of Many Faces. Finally, at level 8, or at level 12, Warlock level 8, we get to take another feat, so we get to choose another spell. Again, the spell selection here mostly doesn't matter, though I will pick powerful spells like Fear in order to show what you would take if you were building this character normally. And then, finally, we get a last feat in order to boost our charisma to maximum. The alternative, if you have maximum charisma, is that you will get your Champion Fighter bonus critical hit chance at this level, which does apply to Eldritch Blasts, so it makes fears more powerful. For items for this character, we want to maximize the damage of our Eldritch Blasts, because that's going to be our main attack that we're using almost every turn, and we want to increase the number of crowd control effects that every Eldritch Blast applies as much as possible. So to start, the best in-slot chest item for this character is the Potent Robe. Now this does require a specific story choice, so not every build will have it, but if you do have it, it's going to increase the damage of your Eldritch Blast significantly. Alternatively, you can just use any robe with a bonus to your spell save DC, or in the late game, this character is a great candidate for the Helldusk armor. Although we don't have heavy armor proficiency, this gives you automatic proficiency, and it makes this character significantly tankier, so you can run up into melee in order to do damage with impunity. In addition to that, we want to stack as much crit chance as possible so that we get our Mortal Reminder critical fears as often as possible. So this character is going to use the Deadshot in its ranged weapon slot in order to increase your critical hit chance, and weapons like the Knife of the Undermountain King, you're probably using that in the early game for this character. And then later, the Bloodthirst Dagger can increase your critical hit chance. Also, the Shade Slayer Cloak. Anything that boosts your crit chance is really good for this character. Alternatively to those weapons, Rhapsody is a very good option. You can still dual wield alongside the Knife of the Undermountain King and gain bonuses to your attack rolls, damage, and save DC, which is very powerful because a lot of our effects key off of save DC. Or you can also use Markaheshkir. Now, normally the bonuses from Markaheshkir are not that powerful for this type of character, or wouldn't be that powerful for a character that doesn't rest ever, because its abilities come back on a long rest. But Markaheshkir gives us the option to set Koreska's favor to Bone-Shaking Thunder, which means that every single spell attack that we fire also inflicts 2 turns. It says 1 turn here, but it's actually 2 turns of reverberation. So we get extra reverberation with every attack. Reverberation, when you stack it up, deals thunder damage and knocks enemies prone, so that's yet more crowd control, and enemies who are frightened and prone skip their turn because they can't move in order to get back up. To stack on top of that, we can add the Boots of Stormy Clamor and the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, because we're going to be doing radiant damage as well as inflicting conditions constantly, so we will be adding reverberation to every single attack with these items. And then the Coruscation Ring and the Callous Glow Ring, in order to do radiant damage. Callous Glow Ring's damage is radiant, and the Coruscation Ring inflicts radiating orbs. So then we're stacking radiating orbs, we're stacking reverberation, we're hitting enemies with fear, so we're knocking them prone, giving them huge stat penalties. And in addition, we're doing constant great damage at range, or if we need to, we can cast Shadow Blade and wade up into melee. The Ring of Spiteful Thunder is another good alternative, because we will be doing thunder damage by just proccing our reverberation, especially if we have Markaheshkir. And then the Birthright Hat gives you more charisma, which is what this character needs most, so that's going to be a great helmet option. And of course, if you're walking into melee with Shadow Blade, which does psychic damage, then the Resonant Stone will give enemies vulnerability to psychic damage, so it will double all the damage that you're doing. An enemy who's vulnerable and receiving an automatic critical hit from a Shadow Blade attack is of course dead instantly, so the fact that this is an assassin character who gets to use vulnerability and automatic criticals means you can just blow up any enemy who's not immune to psychic damage throughout all of Act 3 with your melee attacks. So you get great crowd control all of the early levels, and then at later levels, you become an incredibly dangerous melee assassin. I also almost forgot to mention one other extremely powerful item for this character, the Spine Shudder Amulet. Of course, we're dealing damage with ranged spell attacks all the time with Eldritch Blast, so this is going to stack up 6 reverberation with just 1 cast of Eldritch Blast, because it gives you stacks per beam. So the Spine Shudder Amulet, of course, is amazing, especially when combined with all of our other debuffing tools. For our third character, we already have incredible upfront damage at the beginning of encounters to kill specific dangerous enemies, and we've got awesome repeatable crowd control to lock everything down. So what we're missing at the moment is consistent damage output so that we can keep dealing damage turn after turn after turn. There's a lot of characters we could slot into this role, but the one that just does this the best is the Eldritch Knight Thrower. This character is just the most reliable character in Baldur's Gate 3. It always gets the job done at every single turn. It deals amazing damage output that almost never misses. So the Eldritch Knight Thrower just adds that increased element of consistency that makes this party even stronger. Of course, to make this build, we're going to start as a fighter. And for our fighting style, you actually have a couple options here. You can take defense, which is just the best passive option, just makes the character even harder to kill, which of course you already are, being a fighter. Or you can even take protection fighting style. If you pair this with one of your ranged characters in the back line, then when that character gets attacked, protection fighting style does let you defend them. This character will always be using a shield, so this is an option as well. I think defense is a little stronger, but protection is very fun, so I like recommending it on characters where it's good. For our ability scores here, you have two choices. Since this character is strength-based, in Baldur's Gate 3, you can always replace your strength score by drinking an elixir of Hill or Cloud Giant strength. On a low or no resting party, these elixirs last basically forever, so you don't need to stockpile a huge number of them. So we could take 8 starting strength, and then replace that with an elixir. We don't need to do that, though, so I'm going to recommend taking 17 starting strength, 16 dexterity, and 14 constitution, as well as 10 wisdom, and then we will increase these stats even further with our abilities. You can, though, if you want to, start with 8 strength and replace that with a strength elixir, and raise your other attributes, especially your wisdom, which will increase your mental saving throws a little bit more. But this, starting with 17 strength, gives us some feat options that we wouldn't otherwise have. The only important skill for this character is athletics, which of course Lae'zel starts with, so that's the only one that you need to pay attention to. And other than that, we're just moving on to level 2. Fighter level 2, we get Action Surge, which of course is a short rest ability. Now, if your plan is to minimize long resting, then you'll still use Action Surge in important fights. If you're never resting, then this ability won't come up. But either way, we're going to move on to level 3, and we get to take our fighter subclass, which is going to be Eldritch Knight. Now, you could take Champion Fighter here. It has passive abilities, whereas Eldritch Knight spells do have some cooldowns, but War Magic is such a powerful ability for getting extra attacks that the Eldritch Knight Thrower, I think, is still the optimal way to build this character, even if you don't use any of its spellcasting. Of course, we get 2 cantrips here, so one of these is always going to be Booming Blade. This is required for this character because that's how we're going to easily trigger War Magic, where when we cast a cantrip, we can then make a bonus action attack, which we'll get at later levels of Eldritch Knight, so this character can make 1 melee attack and then follow it up with a bunch of throwing weapon attacks. Remember, you're still a fighter, so your melee attacks are still really good. We'll also pick up Mage Hand. It's nice to have this in a party, so this character... we'll pick up Minor Illusion. Every party should have this, so this is going to be the character that's going to run it, because then you can group up enemies in order to hit them with like a grenade explosion or something like that, or lure them apart for your assassins to pick them off one by one. For our spells here, we're going to take Mage Armor. This is a great way to get a long-term benefit. We can cast it on our Warlock, who's going to be in a robe, and that will increase their armor class, so you don't need to use scrolls in order to get that effect. For our second spell, you don't really need anything in particular. You can take Protection from Good and Evil and just concentrate on this spell forever if you want to, but probably you are not casting other spells. For our expanded spell list here, we're going to take a ritual spell of some kind, so I recommend Find Familiar. This is also a ritual, and this gives you a hugely important tool, so Find Familiar, just a very powerful spell overall that doesn't cost a spell slot. Character level 4, we get additional spells, and these mostly don't matter. Outside of the ritual spells, you're not going to be casting your spells here, though you can take Shield for a panic button, and if you're resting more frequently, then you will want to adjust your spell selection a little bit. And then for our feat selection here, we are going to take Tavern Brawler, of course, as a throwing weapon character. Tavern Brawler doubles our strength bonus to our throwing weapons, as well to our damage and attacks, which is what makes this character function and makes them so incredibly reliable and deal such high damage. We also get to add a point here, so we can even out our strength bonus, going up to 18 strength, meaning that we have a +8 bonus from our strength to hit and to damage on every throwing weapon attack that we make. Level 5, we get extra attack, but nothing else particularly important, no decisions to make here. Extra attack, though, obviously doubles our damage. Character level 6, as a fighter, we get another feat, and the feat that we're going to take here is, of course, Alert. As always, we want to go before all of the enemies so that they get as few turns as possible, so this character wants to win initiative. Since we do such high damage, so important to go first. And again, this party is designed to win combats before enemies get to go. All of these characters get super high initiative in order to facilitate that. Eldritch Knight level 7, we get the feature that I have talked about previously, War Magic. After you've cast a cantrip, you can make a weapon attack using a bonus action, and this, of course, is incredibly powerful because we can use Booming Blade as our cantrip in order to attack an enemy in melee, and then with our remaining attacks, we can throw our weapons. Remember that this character can still fight in melee, although we prefer to throw our weapon because Tavern Brawler is just so incredibly powerful. You can still just make melee attacks. We're still a fighter with a big honkin' two-handed weapon, probably, so you can deal a lot of damage, and Booming Blade damage, of course, is very high as well, and it triggers an extra attack every single turn of combat. We also get to pick a couple of spells, but these don't matter. None of these are ritual spells, so we're not going to be spending our spell slots on them because we can't refresh those. Character level 8, we get an expanded spell pick, and here we're going to pick a spell that you almost never see me suggest, and that I rated D tier, but for this particular party is actually somewhat useful because we're going to take See Invisibility. The only reason we're taking this is that it's some benefit that we can get out of our level 2 spell slot, because it lasts until long rest and doesn't take concentration or anything, so you just have the See Invisibility effect sort of passively when you select it with your Eldritch Knight. We're also going to get a feat, which is much more important. And for our feat here, we're going to take Athlete. This way, we can boost our strength by 1, and then we can boost it by 1 again with Heavy Armor Master, and that will let us hit 20 strength while also gaining increased jump distance. This character becomes incredibly mobile with the extra jump distance from Athlete, so we will now be able to go all over the battlefield. And again, a theme of this party is that we have tremendous mobility, so even though we have somewhat fewer options in terms of spellcasting than other parties, we have lots of options as to where and how we take fights. Fighter level 9, we get Indomitable, which again makes us a little bit harder to take down because we can re-roll our saving throws, but there's no particular decisions that we have to make. And then at Fighter level 10, we get Eldritch Strike, which again is fairly useful. We will be hitting enemies with weapon attacks in melee, and that will give them disadvantage on our next effect. It's not just spells, but any effect that we apply to them, they will have disadvantage on. So there's a lot of effects that you can put out from items or Lithid powers that Eldritch Strike will be pretty potent with. For our cantrip selection here, of course, we are again going to take True Strike to annoy people in the YouTube comments. And then for our spell selection, again, doesn't really matter what we pick here because we're not going to be making use of our spells, though obviously if you're building this Eldritch Knight normally, Shield is an incredibly powerful spell that you'll have picked up significantly earlier. Fighter level 11, we get improved extra attack, so now we are making 4 attacks every single turn of combat because we get our Booming Blade attack in melee and then 3 ranged attacks with thrown weapons, so improved extra attack for even more damage output. And again, we get to choose a spell. And then finally, at Fighter level 12, we get our last feat, and the feat that we're going to take is Heavy Armor Master. This lets us boost our strength, so now we have 20 strength, and it gives us damage reduction. Combine that with the damage reduction that we're getting from just the heavy armor sets that we're likely to be wearing at this point, and we're going to be taking very, very little incoming damage, especially with the Armor of Persistence, which will have all incoming damage because it gives you permanent blade ward. Then we will be taking almost no damage because we'll be taking half damage and then reducing that further by the flat damage reduction that this character has, which makes us nearly immune to most incoming enemy physical damage. Obviously, incredibly powerful for this character. For items for this character, there's actually not that many specific item slots that we need for this character. So you can use this character as kind of a catch-all for items that you think are powerful, fun, or cool. Outside of the very core items that we need, this character can really play around with your item build. So if you find something interesting that you've always wanted to give a try, put it on this character and see how it works. There are some items, of course, that we specifically are going to want for this character. And firstly, obviously, we need a weapon. This character needs to do damage with a weapon with the thrown weapon property in order to have the maximum damage when we throw our weapon. In the early game, the returning pike is usually going to be the best one. Since we're an Eldritch Knight, we can use the lightning jabber, which isn't returning, but as an Eldritch Knight, we can bind it as our Eldritch Knight weapon and make it a returning weapon, and it does a lot of damage. Especially if you're not playing on honor mode, this weapon also has some bugs where it does more damage than it should in some circumstances. So you can get a tremendous amount of damage out of the lightning jabber. In the late game, you're going to be using either the Dwarven Thrower or Nyrolna. The Dwarven Thrower is slightly better for single target damage, and if you use Disguise Self, which you can learn as an Eldritch Knight to disguise yourself as a dwarf, then you can deal, you get the bonuses from the Dwarven Thrower, so it's a little better for single targets, but Nyrolna is usually just going to be the best in slot. It's also piercing damage, which has synergy with an item that our fourth character could use extremely well as well. So Nyrolna is usually going to be the go-to throwing weapon in the endgame. We also want a shield. The best shield for this character is usually going to be the Sentinel Shield. Just going first is so powerful, but any shield can kind of fit into this role. Any shield with good defensive bonuses, like the Walking Fortress in the late game or the Safeguard Shield in the early game, are also great options. Outside of that, there are a few specific items that we want. The Gloves of Uninhibited Kushigo increase our throwing damage, so we want those, because obviously, the more damage we're doing with our thrown weapons, the better. The Ring of Flinging also deals an extra d4 bonus to thrown damage, and the Caustic Band will increase our thrown damage as well, and our weapon damage with our melee attacks. Some alternatives to these rings: the Risky Ring can make you even less likely to ever miss your attacks. Combined with your Tavern Brawler bonus, this character will have a 1 in 400 chance of missing basically every attack, because most attacks you make, you'll only miss on a natural 1. With advantage, you will only miss those if you roll 2 natural 1s in a row. The Ring of Protection is also an okay option for this character because just having even more defenses makes this character already very hard to kill, even harder to take down. For our boots, the Evasive Shoes or a similar defensive pair of boots go very well on this character. And then for our armor, we just want the best set of heavy armor we can find. In the end game, this is going to be the Armor of Persistence. Earlier on, it will probably be the Adamantine armor, just to maximize your chance to survive. The Armor of Persistence, of course, synergizes extremely well with Heavy Armor Master, because the damage reduction is additive, so it's going to be 5 damage reduced from every incoming damage, and because we have Blade Ward passively from the Armor of Persistence, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing will deal half damage, so that damage will be halved, and then reduced by 5, which will reduce most incoming damage basically to 0. The Helm of Baldurin, another great defensive item for this character. We have medium armor proficiency, stun immunity, and immunity to critical hits, and constant healing. Bonuses to AC and saves are really good, so just stack your defensive items on this character. Once you have Nyrolna, the Ring of Flinging, and the Gloves of Uninhibited Kushigo, you will have so much damage output, you can just put defensive and utility items on this character and be extremely happy. Also important, you should carry backup weapons with the thrown weapon property. There are times where you want a different damage type or your weapon is disposable, so things like daggers or light hammers are very useful. And this character should also carry bottles of water and healing potions. We get a lot of attacks every turn, so throwing these at your allies, or when you need a bottle of water to create an ice surface or for utility, it can be very helpful to have these stacked on this character. You also can benefit a lot from an Elixir of Bloodlust for extra attacks, or the Elixir of Cloud Giant Strength, which maximizes your Tavern Brawler damage. But outside of the very core items, your weapon and the items that boost your throwing damage, you can really feel free to have fun with this character's itemization. For our fourth character, we want to add some utility to the party. We already have amazing damage output and excellent crowd control that's quite repeatable. So this character is designed to handle out-of-combat situations by giving us a tremendous access to skills, especially lockpicking and trap disarming skills that we badly need, and also to be the glue that holds the party together by putting out fires when you're actually fighting, taking out specific enemies, using our crowd control abilities on dangerous enemies that survive our initial burst, and locking down enemy movement with a lot of crowd control and tremendous mobility. So this character can be anywhere and do anything in order to keep the rest of the party functioning smoothly. It's going to be a somewhat unusual build to see in optimized honor mode parties, but it fits extremely well in this party. We're playing a mono-class Swashbuckler rogue, but some of the choices we're going to be making are going to be a little bit different. Now, of course, we're starting with our rogue level here, and for our ability score selection, we're going to take 17 starting dexterity, 14 constitution, we don't need any points in intelligence, and we'll take 10 wisdom and 16 charisma. Some swashbuckler abilities key off of charisma, so we want that as high as possible. For our skill proficiencies here, we're going to take sleight of hand expertise and stealth expertise, and of course we also want acrobatics, so that we're a little harder to shove around. As a dexterity-based character that's operating mostly in melee, this character can sometimes be pushed by enemies, so acrobatics makes that easier to avoid. We'll also take persuasion proficiency because we will want high persuasion for our level 9 ability that keys off of persuasion. For our last ability here, there's nothing in particular that we need, but taking investigation can be useful. There are some out-of-combat investigation checks that you're going to roll, so this character having proficiency in that can make your whole party slightly better at some of the out-of-combat things that you're asked to do. Also worth noting for this character that if you are playing this as a custom character, or if you're playing Astarion on an origin run, then taking a high elf or high half elf, you can take Booming Blade as your high elf cantrip, and that's very powerful for this character as well. You can only change this cantrip if you're playing Astarion as your main character. Unfortunately, it can't be respec'd during the game. But if you are doing that, or if you're playing a custom high elf or high half elf, Booming Blade is obviously amazing. Character level 2, no choices to make, but of course we get the extremely powerful cunning actions that our whole party basically has access to, except the Eldritch Knight, which makes us incredibly mobile. Character level 3, we get to take our subclass, and the subclass that we're picking is Swashbuckler. Now, Swashbuckler gives us two things right away. Firstly, we get, if you melee attack a target, they can't make opportunity attacks against us, so that makes this character very safe to run around attacking enemies and then running away to avoid reprisal. And then we also get a +2 bonus to initiative. This is equal to our proficiency bonus as long as we keep taking rogue levels. So in the end game, this is going to be a +4 bonus, which is, and basically means we don't have to take alert and can take even more cool feats on this character, and we don't need advantage to trigger sneak attack. So the fact that we don't have another mainline melee character doesn't matter for this character. We're always going to be able to sneak attack. Level 4, we get our bonus actions, and this allows us to use a bonus action to basically get a second attack. This is part of why a monoclass Swashbuckler is pretty useful. You still do great damage, because Dirty Trick, Flick of the Wrist, not only disarms enemies, extremely powerful, it also effectively acts as getting extra attack, even a level early. It does consume your bonus action, which is important for rogues, but it's still a very powerful tool. We also get Vicious Mockery, not going to be used that often, but if you need a ranged option, then sometimes this can be okay. And Sand Toss, which is very powerful because blinding enemies for 2 turns is really good crowd control. The save DC for Sand Toss is also based off your dexterity, not your charisma for some reason, so it's very likely to succeed because we're going to have very high dexterity. We also get a feat, and for our feat, we're going to take a feat that doesn't show up that often, Moderately Armored. This lets us boost our dexterity up, and it also is going to let us use a shield. For most rogues, you would want a weapon in your offhand, but for a Swashbuckler rogue, both of your attacks in the turn are going to be made with your main hand weapon, because your second bonus action attack is going to be Dirty Tricks. So you don't need an offhand weapon, and that way we can use a shield. You can also use medium armor, which will let us use the Yuan-Ti Scale Mail for parts of Act 2, which is going to be the best armor available to this character at that point, giving you higher initiative and armor class. So really nice to have this feat early, and it just lets us even out our dexterity. Level 5, no decisions to make, but Uncanny Dodge is very powerful for this character. We're going to get an extra reaction late game, so this character will actually be very good at defending itself with the various ways that we'll have to stop enemies from dealing damage. They don't get opportunity attacks, we can blind or disarm them, and if they do hit us, we can halve the incoming damage with a reaction. Then, at level 6, we get additional skills, so we can learn extra skill proficiencies here, or extra skill expertise here. So we're going to take expertise in persuasion that we want in order to have really high persuasion for the end game, because we get an ability that keys off of it. We can also take expertise in one of these other skills. Acrobatics just makes you harder to push around, so that's what I'm going to recommend taking there. Level 7 Rogue, we get Evasion, so again, we get just more passive defensive bonuses that don't need a cooldown, so we're going to take no damage from most dexterity targeting damaging spells, which is most of them, since our dexterity bonus is very high and we have proficiency in the save. Level 8, we get another feat, and the feat that we're going to take here is just to increase our damage output. We're going to take Savage Attacker. Savage Attacker is really nice for this character because we're just rolling a lot of dice. It's a melee damage buff that increases our damage output significantly, so Savage Attacker just boosts our damage output enormously at this point in the game. At character level 9, we get Panache. And Panache, while it takes an action, so you're not going to use it all the time, is actually pretty cool for this character and gives us yet another layer of possible crowd control. There's a couple reasons that this is actually better than it looks, despite being just disadvantage for an action. Firstly, it lasts for 10 turns, and that's a really long really long set of crowd control. So at character level 9, we get Panache, and while this ability is not the strongest in the game, it actually performs a fairly useful function for this character. It does take an action, so you're going to be judicious with when you actually use it, but this ability lasts for 10 turns and gives enemies disadvantage on all their attacks against your allies, as long as your allies don't harm them and break the charm effect. It's not mentioned anywhere in the tooltip, but if someone else hits the panached character, they'll lose the disadvantage, so you have to be a little bit careful with how you employ this ability. But giving an enemy that you don't want to target right away disadvantage on all their attacks for 10 turns and inability to make opportunity attacks is really powerful. It can let you just ignore an enemy. Remember also that you can spend your action on this and then still use your bonus action on a dirty trick, so you can disarm one enemy, give another disadvantage, and stack up more crowd control. So this is very helpful for those fights. It also, of course, is always going to work, because the way that it works is it's a persuasion check contested with an insight check, and your persuasion is super high. Enemies typically have fairly low insight checks. They don't usually have bonuses to that, so you're always going to get the success on this panache attack. Rogue level 10, we get another feat, and there's a bunch of different options here that can all be pretty useful. One option is to take an ability score improvement, just boost our dexterity up to 20. If you're finding that this character isn't hitting their attacks as much, that's definitely a great option. However, what I'm going to recommend here is that we take instead Sentinel. Sentinel is really nice for a rogue because it lets you effectively cheat your sneak attack to half a turn early. The way that sneak attack works is it's a per round cooldown, but it refreshes at the end of your turn. So if you make an attack and get sneak attack, you then end your turn and you get sneak attack back. So if you make an opportunity attack on the enemy's turn, you can sneak attack them again. Since we're a swashbuckler, we can always sneak attack on all of our attacks. So Sentinel is going to let us use our sneak attack half a turn early. We then won't have sneak attack for the second round of combat, but that's okay. 2 sneak attacks with Savage Attacker should kill most enemies. It also prevents enemies from moving, and that's very powerful for this party, of course, because we need more crowd control. We just want ways to stop enemies from doing stuff. This character dancing around the backlines, being extremely annoying and hard to hit, dealing great damage, and preventing enemies from moving just shuts down a lot of what enemies are trying to do. This is also the point in the game where our other characters, our Warlock, is probably moving into melee more, so getting the reaction for when an enemy attacks an ally can be helpful as well. Rogue level 11, of course, we get reliable talent, which makes this character even more amazing at passing all the skills. It makes panache better as well, because you're still making the persuasion check. And then you will also just never fail at picking a lock. So this character becomes even better at out-of-combat utility. Finally, at character level 12, we get an additional feat, and we're going to take an ability score improvement to max out our dexterity. Obviously, we want this as high as possible to make our character as strong as possible. Another thing that's worth mentioning at this point is there's a couple other feats that we could take on this character depending on our gear selection. If you're playing a race that has glaive proficiency, you can use the Dancing Breeze, and you can take Polearm Master. At that point, you would want to respec out of Moderately Armored and take Polearm Master instead in order to make use of the Dancing Breeze. Another option for this character, because we're probably going to be in light armor and we're likely going to be using the Duelist's Prerogative at this point in the game, which means we won't be using a shield and we won't be in medium armor, is to respec out of Moderately Armored, use any stat item to increase our dexterity, like the Mirror or Ethel's Hair, and instead of that, take any number of other cool feats, but one that I think is particularly fun for this character is Defensive Duelist. You're always going to be using a finesse weapon, and we're going to have 2 reactions if we're using the Duelist's Prerogative. So this basically gives us shield every turn for free without spending a spell slot. This was mentioned in a comment on my original Swashbuckler video. I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, but this is actually a really cool idea, and I think it's actually definitely worth pursuing. Alright, that's the last character, but let's talk about their items. For items for this character, we're looking to double down on the things that we're good at, make the character harder to kill, because this character can be a little bit squishy and likes to play aggressively, being up in melee with enemies and dancing around in their backline, so making sure that we have the defenses to support that playstyle is important. And of course, we want to increase our damage output and just our overall utility to the party. Firstly, of course, we need a finesse weapon, because Swashbuckler Rogue's abilities require that you have a weapon with the finesse weapon property. In the early game, this can be anything, but it's probably going to be usually the short sword of First Blood. This is a very solid finesse weapon that does a bunch of extra damage to enemies who have all of their HP, which is really nice in the early game. This can let you burst down a high health enemy much more quickly. Later on, we might swap that for something like the Crimson Mischief if you want to keep using a shield, but I recommend in the late game going for the Duelist's Prerogative. This gives you additional crit chance and an additional reaction, which works extremely well with Sentinel. It also works with Defensive Duelist if you took that as a feat later on, and it also works with Rogue's Uncanny Dodge ability, so you can reduce incoming damage massively by giving you extra reactions. It also, just has an extra bonus action attack naturally, so even against enemies who don't have weapons, so you can't use your disarm against them, you can still do a second main hand attack with the Duelist's Prerogative because of the Dueler's Enthusiasm action, which just lets you make an extra main hand attack. So this is going to be our best in slot endgame weapon, unless you are a character who is playing a race that has glaive proficiency, in which case you can use the Dancing Breeze, which gives you a reach weapon. You can combine this with Polearm Master and Sentinel, in order to lock enemies down in a much larger area, prevent their movement, and just give you a huge amount of control over the battlefield. In addition to these finesse weapons, of course, we want some other items. So one of the other items I really like on this character is the Helmet of Grit. Our bonus actions are incredibly valuable, so if you're happy playing at 50% HP, and remember this character has a lot of tools to protect itself, an extra bonus action is incredibly strong, so it makes you have just wildly more options and a lot more power overall. We're going to be using the medium armors with uncapped dexterity in the early game as well. Things like the Yuan-Ti scale mail. Obviously, you'll use whatever the highest AC light armor you have up to this point until you get this item, but as soon as you hit Act 2 and get the Yuan-Ti scale mail, this is going to be the best one for this character because the initiative bonus is also really useful during Act 2. In the end game, you can swap to a light armor. A defensive light armor like the Elegant Studded Leather gives you even more initiative and decent AC. Or, of course, if you took the story events that get it for you, the Ballast Armor is a tremendous power-up, not only for this character, but for your entire party. You have an Archer and a Nirolma Thrower in the party, so doubling the damage output of those characters by giving enemies vulnerability to piercing damage, as well as, of course, this character, with the Duelist Prerogative also doing piercing, is absurdly strong, so the Ballast Armor is just broken and will be incredibly powerful in the end game for this character as well. In the early game, you will, up until you get the Duelist Prerogative, you're going to want to use a shield. The Safeguard Shield is a nice one for this character. Saving throws and armor class are really good, so just giving yourself a few more a little bit more survivability goes a long way for this character, and then we're going to stack on other survivability items as well. Items like the Cloak of Protection or Displacement can keep the character alive much more easily. The Ring of Protection, if you're not using it on your Eldritch Knight, is good here. Or you can go for more aggressive rings like the Shadow Cloaked Ring. Enemies who are heavily obscured, or enemies who are obscured are often what you're going to be fighting with this character because you're going to be in the backline away from your party's lights. Your Warlock needs enemies lit for the Callous Glow ring, but the Shadow Cloaked ring on this character can work against any obscured enemy in the backline. Crusher's Ring is also really nice. We really want lots of mobility on this character, so utility items like this go a long way. Also important for this character, and what I recommend keeping until the end game, is the Disintegrating Nightwalkers, or another set of boots that makes you immune to being prone or falling over on ice. With our Archer, using the Snowburst Ring combo, there's going to be a lot of ice on the battlefield, and making this character, who's our main melee character, immune to it means we can move through that much more freely. So while the Misty Step isn't that useful on the Nightwalkers, unless you are resting more frequently, the inability to be enwebbed, entangled, and snared, and can't slip on ice is super helpful, so you really want immunity to slipping. This character also wants to carry a pair of hand crossbows in the ranged weapon slot. Just gives you a lot of options for ranged damage. You can use sneak attack at range, and just gives you a ton of optionality. If you can't get into melee, you can continue to do consistent damage. And finally, for our amulet, I really like the Amulet of Greater Health on this character. Though there's a lot of other options as well, but because this character is going to be in melee and relatively squishy, the extra hit points go a long way, especially if you're using the Helmet of Grit. Then that will let your half value, your hit points, which are half of your normal total, still be a reasonably survivable total, combined with your other options to stay alive. So this character gives a tremendous amount of utility, and lets you just move around the battlefield, doing more or less whatever you want. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the No Rest party, and I hope you enjoy tirelessly stomping your way through Honor Mode, never stopping to rest or even slowing down. This party is really fun to play and very straightforward because every character just does what it does extremely well all the time. So you never have to worry about juggling your resources or being in worse shape for a certain fight or taking a fight while you are close to resting and maybe that fight then goes worse, because none of those things come up for this party. So it can be fun for a challenge mode. It can also just be a very powerful tool to make sure that you always are at full capacity, even in a run where you're resting all the time. As always, of course, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out a ton with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.